Ah, yes, the time has come.
So Leon has been reviewing Resident Evil 4, the remake. If you can review it in one sentence, what would you say?
It's just a really good horror game, whether you've played the original or not. It's exciting, it's kind of stressful and scary, it looks fantastic, lots of texture and variety, and it's a real kind of like journey to sort of go on with the story and the things you sort of see. And it's a great horror game.
Okay, so I think the main thing that I'm interested in, and I think other fans will be interested in, is changes to the original and how does it feel? Is it just a reskin? How much of a remake are we talking about here?
It's a complete remake because it's in a new RE engine. So it's not like reskinned in any way. It's completely remade, new controls. Visually, obviously, it looks great. So it's kind of like a modern interpretation of the old game. It's hard. It's really weird because it's basically a completely different game that does exactly the same thing, but in like modern kind of like style. So the controls are more like modern, normal controls. Basically, it's a modern version of the old game.
So you're playing the same scenes that you remember. You're fighting the same enemies, the same bosses. So you're recognizing it, but as you're playing it, like, this feels completely different.
Yeah, it's different to the previous remakes. The Resi 2 and Resi 3 were static cameras, pre-rendered backgrounds, literal tank controls you turned on the spot and pushed backwards and forwards. So when those were remade, they became completely new games, very, very obviously. This sort of looks similar because it's a third-person, over-the-shoulder camera. But yes, modern, more normal controls, all the sort of the modern sort of bells and whistles. But the enemies, the encounters, the sort of the style and structure is all kind of identical to how it was before.
And what you think? How are you feeling about the combat?
So the combat is really good. It's really interesting because in the original game, obviously you had sort of quite limiting controls that forced you to have to kind of stop and shoot and take a look at the enemies and work out who your threats were and how to deal with it. And this kind of mirrors that by having the enemies, they're constantly kind of pushing on you. It's quite sort of stressful because in the sort of the previous games, your ammo counter is like, you're almost like you kind of count down to trouble. Like as long as you've got bullets, you're okay. This, you've just constantly got people shuffling at you. So you're constantly trying to deal with the fact that they're pressing on you, they're getting closer. So it's quite a sort of a stressful kind of fingertip kind of graspy fight So
it's a different kind of stress. Instead of watching your ammo counter, you're looking at them coming at you, and it's a claustrophobic kind of stress.
Yeah.
You're just like, where's my out? Where can I run to? How can I get past?
It's much more like, I was literally looking up, like, visceral is like a cliche because it gets used all the time by people, like, incorrectly. But this is quite a visceral kind of feeling of fear because it's very internal, it's very sort of within you because you are like constantly dealing with like, oh, I've shot that guy but now this one's getting too close, I've dealt with that one but I can see someone coming over here. And especially right at the beginning, it goes on forever. There's when you first go to the village, you are just beset for ages and you don't know what you're meant to be doing, and it's just survive until the bell rings and then they all wander off and you're okay. But until you realize that, you die over and over again because you're trying to essentially deal with a never-ending tide of enemies. And it's just it's stressful, but like in a way where it doesn't rely on kind of like, jump scares and sort of gory monsters. It's just dealing with the
slow,
pressure.
constant build. And it's your brain working overtime. That's really interesting.
Which is what the first game, the original game, did, but via different means because you have sort of different controls and a limited camera, and it becomes fraught in a different way. So the change in texture over time is one of the things it does really well. The combat basically only kind of works if you can sort of run away and get some distance between you, because the Ganados and the sort of various enemies, they lurch and they move left and right as enemies do, because obviously you're trying to make themselves hard to hit. But Leon also has a slight wobble on his aim that like can be sort of improved with sort of gear, and also if you hold the aim up, the wobble slowly kind of like gets less, which is obviously.
But as you first pull it up, you'll be going left and right a bit.
It's sort of realistic, but it means that like where the enemies can kind of like lurch a bit left and right, your gun can wobble a bit left and right, and sometimes no matter how hard you can try, you can have like almost kind of a farcical comedy of every time you pull the trigger, you lurch one way, they lurch the other, and you miss, and you're obviously always trying to go for headshots because the most damage. By the end of the game, I was mainly kind of aiming for upper chest because this weird little wobble combined with their lurching means that through no fault of your own, sometimes you can sort of like miss them like several times because the movement happens just as you pull the trigger and there's nothing you can do about it.
And when ammo is scarce, you're like, hitting them in the chest is fine.
So there's a few bits that can be quite frustrating because unless you just can't fight within about sort of a 3 foot radius, say, it all just kind of falls apart. And you have a knife, but it's not the strongest thing in the game. And they have a new knife durability thing where if you use it to get out of an attack, if you get grabbed, it breaks the knife a little bit, and eventually the knife can break completely.
Oh.
So you're constantly having to sort of repair your knife and
But the knife can still stop chainsaws.
Yes, yeah, you can parry. Yeah, parrying is does the least amount of damage, but it's also the higher sort of risk one because it's a much stricter kind of timing. But if you get grabbed, you can use it to like stab them and instantly get out. You can also mash the button, but you're taking damage the whole time.
Right.
But using it to get out of a grab uses the most of the durability bar.
So something else to balance.
But yeah, combat definitely. If you can't make space, you struggle in a way that doesn't feel like there's anything you can really do about it because you'll get grabbed several times.
So they do like grappling, don't they?
Yeah, you can't really aim when they're too close. So yeah, like there's a couple of points where you're like, yeah, this doesn't work. But it's only if you can't make space to deal with it.
It looks really good.
Yeah.
As well as updating all this back-end stuff and the mechanics side of it, they have not skimped on the visual side.
That engine, that Resi engine is amazing. Like, it looks good. Like, it's always looked good. And in this, it's like there's just loads of little details. Like in the Hunter's Lodge, which is like pretty much the first area you go, like there's just so much like little bits of detail. There's like little bones on the strings and just things to sort of look at. Like, it's definitely one of those games where you just stop and like take it all in because visually it's lovely.
Yeah. How long is it roughly?
I'd say 20-25 hours. I think my final time was about 22-23 hours, and I did a lot of backtracking. But yeah, there's lots to do. I mean, if you powered through it and didn't really worry too much about finding things and going back for stuff, you could probably clear it in like sort of 15-18 hours. Resi 4 is basically everything that was in the original pretty much is there. There's a few tweaks that I was quite surprised by. There's one boss fight that is very, very different. I was expecting something specific from the original game, which was sort of great and over the top and ridiculous, and this does something slightly different, but it works really well. Like, I think it's a good reinterpretation of it.
With everything you've said in mind, what score are you going to give it?
Yeah, it's a really good remake. It's a really good game generally, whether you've played the original or not, so I'm going to give it 4.5 stars out of 5.
If you want to read Leon's full review, we've got a link in the description below. If you're excited to play Resident Evil 4 Remake, let us know in the comments, and let us know what part of it you're most excited to play.
When you need only accept the sacred gift. Christ! Like she did.